you won't support it.
Jesus was a Jew, Allie, and Jews believed that life begins at first breath, not at conception. So this whole idea that life begins at conception, it's not biblical.
Wait, what did he just say? Well, if that was convincing you, buckle in, because we're about to pull a lot of these clips apart. Welcome to FreeThinking Ministries, where we aim to help people reason together by applying logic and sound theology to all aspects of life. My name is Josh Klein, and today we are going to be reacting to some claims made in a recent Jubilee surrounded video. And if you don't know what that is, Jubilee is a media company on YouTube that prides itself on putting together people of different persuasions to discuss controversial topics. Surrounded is one of those shows. They do this. Usually they bring in a well-known influencer or public individual. They sit in the middle and they make 4 or 5 specific claims. And then 20 to 25 people sit around them in a circle waiting to debate them. Countdown hits 0. They rush to the middle. The first to touch the chair gets to debate the person in the middle. Then once a majority of people in the circle vote that person out, the timing starts all over again. People rush in. It's interesting. There have been a lot of well-known individuals who have done it. In fact, Charlie Kirk did it. I reacted to one of Charlie Kirk's appearances on there. I'll put that in the description. Allie Beth Stuckey is the most recent person to do it. She's a conservative Christian podcaster that has over 675,000 people subscribed on YouTube. So I'm going to react to this. Now, first, I want to say this. I want to say that I think Allie did a great job handling the rapid fire responses in so many of the videos. With so many of these people running in and just rapid fire. It's a difficult situation to be in, but I think she handled it with grace, with truth, and with clarity, and I think she did a great job. So I want people to know at the outset, if you're looking at this for me to critique what Allie said, that's not what this video is about. In fact, we're not even going to watch a lot of her answers today. So if you want to do that, for that, you need to click the link in the description and watch the full episode. I encourage you to do that. But instead, today, I want to focus on specific claims that her interlocutors made. Claims that Allie did not engage, not because she failed, but because she knew what they were trying to do. They're trying to lead her somewhere. Her expertise couldn't speak to some of that, so she consistently redirected the conversation to where she was most prepared. And I think that was a very fine strategy and something she should have done and did do. So she really put on a masterclass of doing that. And recognizing where your shortcomings are and sticking to the main thing is always important. So I encourage you, if you watch the whole video, you won't be disappointed. But only watch it after you watch this video. Or maybe you've already watched the video and now you're clicking on here. But anyway, I digress. Before we jump in, I want to ask you to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. And put in the comments if you want more videos like this one. We do a weekly podcast, but we want to put out more content as we can. Whatever the audience wants, it will get within reason, of course. I don't do one of those things. You see the people that say, "Oh, first comment, I'll do whatever the top comment says." That's not going to happen here. I will do whatever the most interesting comment says, and I get to judge that. All right. So when I watched this surrounded video, I was struck by how progressives kept asserting the same arguments that I have heard over and over and over. If you don't know what I do, part of what I do with FreeThinking Ministries is I actually go speak on these topics in various churches. I just did a pastor training on some of these topics. I think it's very important to do that sort of thing. Churches aren't prepared to respond to some of these arguments, as we see, because the arguments continue to be made. They have been debunked and answered time and time again, yet they still seem to catch people off guard. So what we want to do today is give you an opportunity to focus on some of these specific claims and debunk these claims as quickly as possible. No beating around the bush, just quick and measured responses so you can be armed with the same responses when someone comes with those same objections. Okay, let's get into it. Again, I'm going to try to do this rapid fire. First clip is going to be by someone named Tim Whitaker, and Tim Whitaker is with the New Evangelicals. And this is what Tim Whitaker has to say.
It's only between one man and one woman.
But the Bible says that Lamech took 2 wives, that Jacob married his first cousins, right? And they were sisters as well.
So your
and
argument
that's where the whole
is that
line of
they
Israel comes through, right?
exist.
Okay, Tim from the New Evangelicals here says these questions, and it's interesting. His response is, well, you say marriage is only between one man and one woman, but we see marriage as polygamy talked about in Scripture and not condemned. So here's the thing. Allie does a great job of reframing her statement, saying, I should have said holy marriage, but I want to tackle his objection here. When someone comes at you with the polygamy question, and he talks about Lamech, and so if someone's going to talk about Lamech, the question you need to ask yourself is, why in Genesis chapter 4 does the author of Genesis make a point to say that Lamech was the first to take 2 wives? There are 2 answers to this. Here's the answer. Because it wasn't standard fare and Lamech's aberrant behavior was notable, and 2, because he was of the line of Cain, which continued in its rebellion. There's 2 different lines, Cain and Seth. We see Seth's holiness, Cain's unholiness. So that's why Lamech gets, hey, he's the first to take 2 wives. He started this trend. And if he started this trend, is it a good thing? So a common tactic progressives will do is they will say the Bible doesn't condemn X, but the Bible condemns things in 2 ways, explicitly and implicitly. Allie is right in her response when she says things are descriptive and prescriptive, but it doesn't stop there. Things are also explicitly condemned, like homosexuality in Leviticus 18:22 and 1 Corinthians 6:9. More on that later. And implicitly condemned, given the context and the general thrust of all of Scripture. So polygamy is implicitly condemned throughout the New Testament, throughout the Old Testament, and then explicitly condemned in the New Testament, especially for church leaders. For example on this, I want to look at how Jesus handles the topic of divorce with teachers of the law in Matthew 19. They ask him, well, why was divorce allowed? Why did Moses say you could have a certificate of divorce? And Jesus' answer is because of the hardness of people's hearts. The same could be said for a variety of implicitly condemned behaviors, including polygamy. Final thing. Polygamy is evil marriage, but it is still a form of marriage because marriage in principle is oriented towards procreation, and same-sex unions, by definition, cannot, in principle, accomplish such a thing. So Tim's argument fails on all of those levels here.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk about Romans 1 real quick. Let's get that out of the way. Do you understand that Romans 1 is speaking about how the Gentiles have to do all this as a rhetorical trap in Romans 2? To go ahead and say to the Jews, you're all actually guilty as well, and you all need Christ.
Where are you getting that idea?
Have you read Romans 1?
Yes, of course I read Romans 1.
So-
I have it in front of me. I can read
Yeah,
it for you if
Right
you'd
before,
like.
right before 26, right before 25, right before 27, all about idolatry.
Yeah.
So why is it that this is not about idolatry?
Well, we'll be on Paul for a little while in this episode, but here's the point. Yes, Paul is showing the Jews, Paul, the Apostle Paul, not this Paul, it's a little bit difficult here. The Apostle Paul is showing the Jews that they are not saved simply because they have the law. Romans 2:12-13 says this, all who sin apart from the law will also perish apart from the law, and all who sin under the law will be judged by the law. For it is not those who hear the law who are righteous in God's sight, but it is those who obey the law who will be declared righteous. So yes, of course, Paul is showing the Jews in Rome that they have the same sin issue as the Gentiles. But here's the thing. His argument here is a non sequitur. Of course, yes, the Apostle Paul is showing the Jews they aren't special in terms of sin and salvation, just because they have the law. But that has no bearing on whether homosexuality is condemned as part of that sin nature in Romans chapter 1. At best, this would show just that the Gentiles and Jews who practice homosexuality were both living outside of the created order of God's design. And for more of that, why don't you take a look, if you'd like, a review of Brandan Robertson's book on our website. It's linked in the description.
So this is the only reference of lesbianism in the New Testament. You would say that, right?
That I can think of, sure.
Except St. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, Gregory, all of them said it wasn't. Because what's actually happening here in Greco-Roman times is that women are having anal intercourse as part of ritual taboos. That's why it's idolatry.
Okay, this is sort of true and sort of not. Let's break it down. Of course, Augustine, Aquinas, and Gregory, who I'm assuming Gregory of Nyssa is who he's talking about, didn't say it was a case of lesbianism, because lesbianism as an identity wasn't around. This is the same thing that Brandan Robertson and other progressives do all the time. On one hand, they say the Bible doesn't condemn homosexuality because that identity was foreign to the biblical authors and the early church. And on the other hand, they claim as proof against calling homosexuality a sin, that the Bible and the early church leaders didn't explicitly speak about it in terms that we would recognize. So they didn't call this lesbianism. So why would we call it lesbianism? So that's the first thing. You can't have, it's one or the other. You can't have both. Number two, he's just wrong in the facts here. Gregory of Nyssa never even spoke on Romans chapter 1, not once as far as I know. So to say he didn't think it was about lesbianism seems to be a stretch, unless you knew him personally, which I don't think you did. To be fair to Paul, perhaps he was confusing Gregory of Nyssa for someone else. Perhaps I don't know exactly which Gregory he's talking about. This sort of medium lends itself to misspeaking or misremembering. That is fair. However, misattribution is absolutely done here as well. The question I would have for this Paul character is, okay, so where exactly do Aquinas and Augustine say this then? You say that Augustine and Aquinas don't say it's about lesbianism. We agree that perhaps the term lesbianism didn't exist. The idea of it didn't exist. But was it about the lesbian sexual act? And as far as I'm aware, Aquinas never says there is a specific pagan worship practice that Paul is speaking about here. He sees homosexual acts between men and women as an ultimate product of past idolatry and a sin against natural law. That's what Aquinas says. Likewise, Augustine never did either. I looked for quotes on the matter, and I never found them. Do I think Paul is lying here? Not intentionally, but I think he is reading a progressive's reinterpretation of the Summa Theologica by Aquinas and City of God by Augustine, and not checking the primary sources themselves. I think he's just wrong here. So what do you do if someone says something like this? Here's what I would say. Ask, can you give me an exact quote from these church fathers that indicates that they didn't think it was lesbian sexual acts? It seems if that was the case, this would be more widely known in academic circles, especially in the Catholic Church, but it's not. So let's move on.
What word is used in the Old Testament to talk about male-on-male relationships?
I don't remember the Hebrew term.
Kadishim, which is actually male prostitutes.
And you were talking about, do you believe that it was just pederasty or it was pedophilia that they were
Well, it
condemning
was.
at the time?
Kadishim literally means male prostitutes.
All right. Like I said, get ready for a gish gallop from Paul. He's confident. I like that, but he's also wrong. But he is confident. So a good rule of thumb is when someone like Paul brings up Hebrew or Greek word, they don't actually know what they're talking about. They haven't studied it. They've just read about it somewhere and incorporated it into their own defense of progressivism. So first, notice a subtle shift here. I don't know if he even realizes he's doing it. But first, he brings up Leviticus 18:22. He says we can talk about Leviticus 18:22 if you want. And then he brings up the word kadishim as the Hebrew word for male sex. Well, here's the problem with that. Kadishim isn't even used in Leviticus 18:22. That word is only used a handful of times in the Old Testament, and it is specifically referring to cult prostitution. Absolutely. He's right about that, but it is not the word used for male sex in Leviticus 18:22 or elsewhere. It is only used in the books of the law one time, Deuteronomy 23:17. Leviticus 18:22 speaks nothing of cultic prostitution. It simply says a man or a woman that lies with the same sex as he or she would with the opposite sex is an abomination. It is part of the moral code of the ethics for Israel. The two are not related. Deuteronomy 23:17 is part of the civil code reflecting the morality of Israel. Okay, more Paul.
Arsenakoitai?
Arsenakoitai is one of the words that's used for that. There's also another word that's used in Romans 1 to condemn homosexuality.
Malakoi.
But we don't actually...
Okay, yay. Let's move to Greek and see how we butcher this one. Just a point of order, malakoi isn't used in Romans chapter 1 at all. She says, well, there's another word used in Romans 1, and he says malakoi. Like he said, oh, I know it's used in Romans. It's not used in Romans 1. Malakoi is not there. It's used in 1 Corinthians 6. But let's see what else he says about these Greek terms.
Pedophilia here. I'm talking about pederasty. Arsenakoitai, do you know the earliest usage of it?
I don't.
It was actually used as economic exploitation of men. Because back then, the only homosexual relationships you had, keep in mind, the word homosexual came in the 1860s.
No, it wasn't. He's talking about the Sibyllene Oracles, I think, here. And you don't really need to know what those are, but he's just wrong here. Even if he was right that the oracles are talking only of economic subjugation, which, by the way, is a very hotly debated topic. So it's not even close to settled. In fact, scholars such as David F. Wright and James B. DeYoung argue that the term simply means male sex, even in the oracle. So there's semantic continuity. So he's just wrong that it's settled. That this is obviously this is actually what it means. And you translating male sex in 1 Corinthians 6 is just wrong. He's also very wrong that it's the earliest usage in the Sibyllene Oracles. The scholarly consensus, even among progressive scholars is that 1 Corinthians 6:9 predates the oracles by at least 15, maybe 70 years. Now, there are some people who say, well, it was a Jewish tradition before that, but that is all speculative. We have no evidence of that word being used before 1 Corinthians chapter 6 was written. And the Sibyllene Oracles, where it was written, where this term, and it's not even the exact same term, where it was written, came up at least 15, maybe even 70 years after 1 Corinthians 6:9. And so he's just wrong here.
And above that, malakoi was used for effeminate men that were castrating themselves for the goddess Athena. When Christianity first came...
Wow, confidence. Is this true? Big if true. Well, here's the thing. It's a minority view, and Paul here is wrong about Athena, and probably he means Cybele. Regardless, again, he could just be making a mistake and misspeaking here. I get that. So he's got the wrong goddess. He's wrong on the fact that malakoi is used in Romans 1 as well. We already went over that. Regardless, Paul could be pointing to this use of malakoi, sure, with Cybele, but that does not explain Arsenakoitai, and there was no temple to Cybele in Corinth, but there could have been worship there regardless because there was a cult of Cybele. But malakoi is a general term for weak men anyway. So this is actually very hotly debated even today. So here's the thing. He sounds very confident, and when very confident people say very wrong or not even very wrong, but very hotly debated things, because sure, could he be right about malakoi? Sure, he could be, but it is nowhere near settled in academia. When they do that, and she does a great job of not falling down the rabbit trail here, when they do that, I bet dollars to donuts that all they've done is read a progressive book on the topic, and now they think that there's an expert. So let's move on.
Actually have Greek words that Paul likely knew about that were reference homosexuality. Why didn't he use them? Why did he only use two words that mean effeminate men, which he was describing for men that castrate themselves for Athena, and Arsenakoitai, which refers to men that take advantage of smaller men, like sex slave trade?
Okay, if someone ever pulls this on you, here's a quick response. Okay, what words? You said there were. You seem to know some Greek. Name them. Since you seem to be so good at Greek, name them. I'd like to know what they are, because I've studied Greek, and the only two terms I know for that in Koine Greek are Arsenakoitai and malakoi, and we've already talked about those terms. So what exactly are those Greek terms? However, interestingly enough, I would turn it back around on them. There actually were Greek words in the first century indicating sex slavery and pederasty. In fact, guess where we get our English word pederasty from? You're right. It's from Greek. So I'll offer a bunch of Greek words for you right now that Paul could have used if he wanted to talk about temple prostitution and pederasty, because he didn't use these. And if he wanted to talk about illicit sex as well, which people want to insert into the malakoi and Arsenakoitai conversation. Again, you don't need to be a Greek scholar to know these. Here they are. So the first one is paiderastia. That's pederasty. That's where it comes from. So that's boy love. The other one is paiderastes, which is lover in pederasty. That's lover of boys. The next one is hierodoulos. That's a temple prostitute. A hierodoulos is a sacred servant or slave, a temple prostitute. The next one is porne. It's a common prostitute. We get our word porn from that, pornography from that. And it's broad sexual immorality, illicit sex is porneia, and it is also used in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. So if Paul wanted to say, hey, I want to talk about illicit sex between a male and a male, he could have coined a term that put porneia and koite together. He could have said pornokoite. Instead, what did he say? He said arsenakoitai. Oops. So here's the thing. Paul would have to explain why the apostle didn't use any of those words, but chose to basically coin his own term instead. The most likely explanation here is that Paul coined the term arsenakoitai to cover a gambit of same-sex behaviors, including all of the above and the consensual sexual acts of same-sex people. And he did so by linking this first century Jewish Christian audience in Corinth with the two major Greek words used in the Septuagint in Leviticus 18:22, arein and koitos, or arsenakos, or koitos. In other words, it is obvious that Paul wanted his readers to be drawn back to Leviticus 18:22, and they naturally would have been drawn back to Leviticus 18:22, not to some Greek goddess Cybele or to temple prostitution, which he could have pointed to and decided not to. So again, all of these arguments fall flat in the face of the evidence. And we can ask these questions, and I have yet to receive a good response. Okay, let's be done with Paul here, and let's move on now to some abortion arguments using scripture.
You've heard of Numbers 5 in the Bible.
Yes, I have.
When
Yes.
it talks about that if a woman cheats on her husband,
If the husband suspects that the woman has cheated, not
Thank
if
you.
she's cheated.
right, if he even suspects that she's cheated on her husband,
Yes.
that she is to go and have a ceremony performed by a priest where the
Yes.
priest, it says that he mixes the sand from the tabernacle ground, puts it into a holy water,
Yes.
and that water says that if there is a curse, if she's done the wrongdoing, there
Yes.
will be a curse and there will be a miscarriage, which what it
There's-
sounds like is like an intentional removal
It's
of
yeah.
the, of
I
the
could
child.
see how someone
Okay, the numbers 5 thing. So here's a few things on this, and this is a very obscure passage. So if you're not aware of it, now you can be aware of it, and it's brought up often. I've heard this brought up so many times. So first, I think we need to be clear on what this law was meant to do. This law is meant to protect women. It's not meant to kill children. That's first of all. It's meant to protect women and not kill children. Second, even if what she is saying is true, this is not a person seeking an abortion. It is God executing his judgment on sin. God has the right to do that. He is God after all. So it's an internal critique. You have to recognize that that's what Numbers 5 is talking about. Finally, this passage is very tricky. It's not clear that this is about a miscarriage. In fact, there's no reference to pregnancy at all necessarily. What this seems to be pointing to is inducing barrenness in the womb or infertility for that cheating, for the infidelity, not necessarily an invocation of an abortion. So no, it's not instructions for an abortion. It's instructions for a ritual to discern guilt so that women couldn't simply be stoned at an accusation. That's important. But check this out. Numbers 5:28 says this, but if the woman has not defiled herself, meaning she hasn't cheated on her husband, and is clean, then she will be free of all ill effects and will be able to bear children. Hold on to that last section there. Will be able to bear children. Multiple will be able to bear children. Finally, according to Hebrew scholars, this test was never actually done. So when you look at Numbers 5:28, in light of the earlier passage, you recognize that this is probably more about protecting women and declaring a woman barren because of her infidelity, that she wouldn't be able to fulfill her role as a wife to bear children. The barrenness is the judgment and not a miscarriage. Finally, this whole the thigh fell away part could be that whatever it means, the uterus rots, and I know this sounds weird and gross, and becomes unable to produce kids. Interestingly enough, there is a Hebrew word for miscarriage. It's shakal, and it is not used in this passage. So couple that with the curse of barrenness, and I think really this argument falls flat, and it's not an abortion anyway.
If two men are fighting and they hit a pregnant woman, if she has a miscarriage, and again, there is debate on if it's miscarriage, if she has a premature birth, but the child survives,
Yeah.
the man has to pay only a fine. But if it says if there's further harm, that's when it goes to life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, all that stuff. And that is in regards to the woman, the harm caused to the woman by the men who have hit her. So I think that, like, if we're talking about how the Bible defines personhood, it's clear that in that law, the unborn child was not like killing them or, causing their miscarriage is not
So it
considered
would have
murder.
been considered manslaughter.
All right, so I feel like I've addressed this passage about 1,000 times, but for Angie's sake, who seems like a really nice lady, let's do the 1,001st time. So in this passage, the translations that use the word miscarriage are actually mistranslating the passage. So I don't think it should be much of a debate, though there is a word for miscarriage in Hebrew. I already talked about it, shakal. It is not used. Instead, the word yasa is used, which is used in terms of bringing something forth alive, something coming forth alive. So premature labor is, in my opinion, the correct translation here. Where Angie goes wrong, though, is that she thinks the harm is only in relation to the woman. But the Hebrew does not demand that here. In fact, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, life for life can and likely does absolutely include the child in this scenario. Thus, harm is not exclusively towards the mother necessarily. So if the child is born and disfigured, there would be subsequent harm. And if the child is born and then dies, then the death penalty would apply. I'm not saying this is the only reading, but it is absolutely a plausible reading and shows that the child is seen in relation to the mother here, not as property of the mother. The fine is only levied if further harm occurs. So let's think through this logically here. The fine is only leveled if further harm occurs. Okay, further harm. Well, the woman has already been harmed. She was hit and went into premature labor. So what would further harm mean? If further harm does not occur, indicating that further harm would include the born baby, and thus rendering this passage moot to the point of abortion. All of that aside, Allie is also correct in her response here that the harm is a different in kind anyway. That the situation here is not done with the express intent of killing the baby, as an abortion is done. It's a result of a different action, thus manslaughter, not murder. And the baby is not seen as ontologically less of value. It's just saying that there are different considerations culturally to understand in relation to how we deal with manslaughter, how we deal with the child being born disfigured, how we deal with the mother bleeding and being further harmed. There are gradations of harm here. And the law is saying take those gradations into consideration and then put forward a judgment of justice accordingly. So that's what it's saying here. I've talked about this tons of times. People still constantly bring it up. Not only a ton of people talk about this all the time. People bring it up. I think it should have been debunked a long time ago.
Jesus was a Jew, Allie, and Jews believed that life begins at first breath, not at conception. So this whole idea that life begins at conception, it's not biblical.
Okay,
It's not Jesus.
This is where we started the show. We've made it full circle. This is where we started. Or do you find that convincing? Is that true? You might think to yourself, is it true that Jews believed that life didn't start at first breath? Well, kind of. Sure, there are plenty of Jews that did believe that. But let's read Luke 1:41 together. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. Are we saying a not alive baby was aware of Jesus in Mary's womb and flipped? Is that what we're arguing here? I just to be clear, is that what we're arguing here? Because that doesn't make sense of the text. Finally, when Mary was with child, is this man indicating that if Mary had performed an abortion on fetus Jesus, that she wouldn't have been ending Jesus's life? Now, while there were certainly some first century Jews that believed that life didn't start until first breath, it was not universally held belief or doctrine. In fact, Josephus seems to indicate all abortions were evil and wrong, although he doesn't talk about gestation periods. They didn't know all of that yet. Early church fathers such as Tertullian and Irenaeus also saw John the Baptist as fully aware that Jesus was in his mother's womb, and they even called John the Baptist a prophet in the womb. How could he be a prophet in the womb if he was not a living being in the womb? Excuse me. Okay, so like I said, I think Allie did a phenomenal job. I encourage everyone to watch the full video, as I wanted to only address these things here that Allie, in her wisdom, did not have time to address. So please check that out. If you like this video, please like it and subscribe to the channel. Also, if you liked it, please consider supporting the ministry. We don't have a Patreon. We don't do memberships. We want to keep things free so that as many people as possible can access our content, but we need your help to keep the lights on. So please go to freethinkingministries.com/donate to join our team. All gifts are tax deductible. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We are looking for $100 a month to close out 2025. We'd love to see that. Please join us if you can. Also, comment below if you want more videos like this one, or if there's something that I missed. We'd love to see it. God bless. And as we say here at Free Thinking Ministries, stay reasonable.